Are you in
started.
the orange chair today?
I'm in the yeah uh, the orange chair that when we first actually the Kathy Baker one just dropped today. I haven't even had a chance to listen to it. I like to listen to them, but and before I met Kathy, I didn't know her. I didn't know anything about her, and so we met her right out in front of where we do the podcast, and she came in. She looked at the chairs, and she's like, "Those are orange." Caitlin and I looked at each other like, "Yeah, yeah, they're orange." There was a moment I kind of thought everything was going to go downhill from there because our chairs were orange. But
well, she had watched a couple of the interviews.
Okay.
After we had gotten that, you're sitting in a red one. We just got
red?
those.
These are red.
The other ones are orange, and they're very uncomfortable. And
right.
I think she had watched and been like, "Oh." She had seen those orange, the uncomfortable ones, and wore an outfit so it wouldn't clash with it or whatever.
Right.
And we were like, no, we got better chairs. We got better chairs now. Don't worry.
You're right about the outfit.
Yeah.
You're right. She did say something about the outfit. That's something that I never really think about.
Yeah, really.
is my outfit.
Well, it's funny because when I put the thumbnails together for the YouTube video, it's you in a black t-shirt every time. I could just pick from whatever interview I want, and it wouldn't even matter.
Yeah. Well, this is pretty much the way that I dress normally. I've always dressed. That's Adam Wingard and I kind of have that in common. We always dress in black.
You can throw Elon Musk in there too.
Yeah.
You see him running around in a black t-shirt.
Well, I don't know if I want to be thrown in the Elon Musk basket. But listen, Jim, I had a quick question for you because you're the person, that really knows everything. And
no, not really.
Well, I just wanted to get your take on what's the best and easiest and fastest way to move a centrifuge? How do you do that? You just put that in your backpack, or they have some trucks lined up, and you got to put them in the back of the. You got to disconnect them.
Them in your trunk,
how heavy are
put
they?
Them in the back seat. Stack them up in the back seat, or put them on a roof rack. Put them on your roof rack on your car. I don't even know. I saw a picture once of some of these things. They had thousands of them.
Who had thousands of them?
The Iranians.
I know.
You don't just pack them up and
you don't think.
them away.
Well,
they won't be that easy to disguise.
Well, how big are they? Do you have any idea? I mean, there were some reports of there's a bunch of trucks headed, which seemed like a little late for the Iranians to have gone you know what? Maybe we should get these centrifuges out of here.
Yeah, with those rockets headed our way, maybe it's time to move some of that stuff, huh? You think? I saw a picture once of a room of these things, and they looked like kind of long, tall, vertical cylinders, maybe not more than a foot or two across. I mean, I have a vague picture of what a centrifuge looks like from the old, astronaut training films when they would put these guys in a centrifuge and spin them around for a little bit to see how they could handle, space travel.
That was a centrifuge, that thing that they spun around in?
Yeah. It's basically anything that spins real fast. I swear, and that's how they separate the heavier. I mean, you're getting into physics here, which my knowledge is like a mile wide and an inch deep, but it's basically how they get the particles of the uranium atom that are the most usable for nuclear devices to separate from the rest of the parts of the uranium atom. I mean, that's how they're enriching it with those centrifuges that pull the heavier parts of the element.
I mean, I just did a quick Google search, and this is just an AI answer to a very basic question, but it says the Iranian centrifuges, specifically the IR1 model, are cylindrical in shape and are typically around 5 feet long. So I guess they're not that big.
Yeah.
It seemed like they'd be pretty easy to move around.
Yeah, they're only 5 feet long. You could fill a
your pickup truck.
A milk truck full of them, you know.
I spoke to you yesterday, Jim, and it was just about the time that the Iranians were retaliating for their centrifuges being all smashed. I don't, stay away from really politics in this show, but just to talk about, like, when our president comes out and says, that statement sounded like a lot of statements I've heard. This is the greatest. This was like the biggest, the most successful.
Totally obliterated, like nothing we've ever seen before. Bigly obliterated. Bigly.
Let me ask you this, Jim, because why is it because of their proximity why is to the proximity to Israel why is Iran? First of all, how many countries have nuclear? As Linda Hamilton, I just said this before. Linda Hamilton told
nuclear.
I used to say nuclear. No, Michael. Nuclear, not nuclear. All right, Linda. I like you. Just look pretty.
I don't know offhand.
There are.
I think it's like under 10. Wouldn't you say?
There's 9 countries with nuclear weapons: Russia, United States, China, France, UK, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Those are the ones I was gonna name.
Why is it?
I think Brazil, could make one if they wanted to. They have enough of stuff, but they haven't really shown that interest yet. South Africa supposedly had a pretty active development program going, but they stopped short of actually, making weapons grade uranium. So there are some countries that were kind of on the verge or could do it if they chose, but have chosen not to for probably lots of incentives not to. So, I knew they were under 10.
What would you think would be like, so the Iranians have been trying to do this for 30 years, according to Biehn.
That's a pretty important qualifier there, According to Biehn, Nikki might stretch the truth a bit to further his aims.
Well, I think it was a month or two.
They probably have in some respects. What's kind of ironic about this, in a sense, is that you and I were roommates years ago when the Iranians grabbed those American hostages. Remember what a significant
the revolution, of course.
The revolution, of course, when the Ayatollah came to power and they grabbed those hostages for a year, and and Carter tried to stage that raid that went disastrously wrong in the middle of the desert. It was
poor Jimmy.
Nothing could go. Guy couldn't catch a break, really.
And the interest rates were like 18%.
Unemployment was 15%. It was a bitch. And then he told us to put on sweaters and not have a malaise. Well, that didn't help too much.
And then Reagan came in and they released them that day. They released.
I remember. I was in Brentwood. Or on my way home from work, I think, around 6:30 or so, and I was going to go vote. And the election was over already. Yeah, they already called it, I mean,
I think I've told
in 1980.
That was 1980?
That was like Argo. That's what Argo was based on, right?
Yeah. Argo was set during that crisis. The Canadians actually did help us get 6 Americans out.
Yeah, I'm
That was a
not
real operation.
as familiar with that movie as I probably should be.
That
But
was
I
that was like Ben Affleck, who was definitely very famous. But I think right
Directing,
before
right?
that, but right before that, he did The Town.
yeah,
Yeah.
The Town is a
Yeah.
fucking awesome
Yeah.
heist movie.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
it followed up with that one. And then I think that's when everyone went like, all right, Ben Affleck, yeah, you're good.
Right.
Let's see what else.
Yeah,
You
can
proved
do
it.
You
You
can do
proved
it,
it.
yeah.
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 I liked Air. I liked Air, the movie
Yeah,
he
that was
directed
great.
with Matt Damon.
Yeah.
You know, I thought that was a very good job. So, for sure.
Uh, I was trying to think. What were we talking about right before that?
Well, we've kind of been talking about those
I just wanted,
centrifuges.
but I just
and
wanted to mention that in 1980, I was living in the house in Van Nuys. You were probably there too, Jim, and maybe
for
but
sure.
I remember watching television and that election being called, and an hour later, we had somebody knocking on the door, and there were two people telling me to get out and vote for whoever Reagan was running against. That we needed every vote. And I said, well, why don't you come on in and take a look at the television here? I think you might want to. I think you can stop knocking on doors at this point. It was like noon or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I remember I was going to go vote. It was around 6:30 or so, and I was going to go vote, leaving work, and I was still registered over in Brentwood from when we lived over there. So I was going to drive over to my polling place, and the election was already called. So I said, "Oh, screw this." So I went over to my girlfriend's house and watched the end of the returns. That was one election I didn't vote in.
Did you know? It will be the hottest day in over a decade in parts of the East Coast. Have you heard about this whole?
I've heard about a real heat bubble over the East Coast. It seems to be actually killing people, isn't it?
I guess if you don't,
dying.
I don't think, in a lot of places they don't have air conditioners because they're not used to, they're not expected to. The temperature's not expected to get up to 115 or 120. So, I'm sure people are dying.
I have been reading about that.
Yeah. So, do you think the what? Yeah.
You know what? And we were talking about Iran, a day or two ago, and you thought that maybe our strike would accelerate things, and then shortly after we spoke, Trump announced a ceasefire.
Yeah.
And now I've read this morning that both sides are sort of violating that ceasefire. So I couldn't tell you what the what the exact status of things is at this point. I was very much reminded of that Tom Hanks movie with Philip Seymour Hoffman called Charlie Wilson's War. Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
And throughout that movie, remember how Philip Seymour Hoffman, whenever somebody will ask him a question, he always seems to say, "We'll see." We'll see. And I think it's in this situation, I'm so reminded of that. What's going to happen? We'll see. I don't know. This is one of those situations where that expression, events are in the saddle and ride mankind, comes to mind.
Well, also it's I know that this situation is it's no different than any other situation, but it's interesting that like we come to terms, I guess. Israel, Iran, okay, in 6 more hours, we're not going to bomb each other, or at 8 more hours. 8 hours from now, we're going to stop bombing each other. And then during those 8 hours, man, each side just throws everything they have.
Right up to the last second.
And even a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes overboard, I think.
Jerome got lost on the way over to your town, and that's why he's coming in a little late. That's so. No, I just haven't been able to follow up on what kind of violations are happening.
I don't think as of the moment there are a lot of violations, but at the same time too, I don't. There's so much. I've realized that, like, I don't know, like I said, a centrifuge. If they're 6 feet tall and they're cylinder, why would they be in those sites that they knew that they were going to get? Why would they have them there?
Well, I mean,
I would think that they would have, one in this person's garage and two in this person's garage.
Nobody, from what I understand, nobody really knows where any of this fissionable material is.
Right.
Where any of the supposedly, I heard a figure yesterday of somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 pounds of uranium that they have enriched to 60%. Again, these figures don't really mean a whole lot to me but they had enriched it from 4 or 5% up to 60%, which was from what I understand, a significant increase. But they had somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 pounds of 60% enriched uranium, which, from what I understand, is plenty to build some bombs.
I just wanted to ask you that
I have to go back and watch Oppenheimer again too.
The whole idea
to remember how they build atom bombs.
The whole idea of Iran will never get the bomb. Iran will never get the bomb through Bush, through Reagan, all the way for every president. Iran will never get the bomb. Iran will never get the bomb. How come Jim Moran doesn't get the bomb and Pakistan can have one?
Israel has had one for decades.
One. And that's another thing I'm wondering. When you the North Korean guys, how many does Pakistan have? How many is that? All that stuff just available online? Pakistan.
The Pakistanis basically bought theirs from the North Koreans, from what I understand. Well, they bought the technology.
That's 30 years ago, though, right?
Yeah, well, not quite 30 years ago, but the Indians developed one, I think, back in the 60s or 70s, and around the time the Chinese did, and they built one to kind of counter the Chinese, and the Pakistanis said, well, we can't see the Indians have a bomb and we don't have one. So they embarked on a program and they basically imported theirs from North Korea.
So is the international law now is nobody else gets them?
Yeah, it's called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It was
that's the thing that Iran just basically said, okay, well, we're
never signed on to, for one thing, but
okay.
it was a major treaty negotiated some decades ago to try to keep other countries from developing nuclear weapons. So they wanted to keep it at just those countries.
Well, I just did a quick Google search to see how many nukes they had, and it says Pakistan is estimated to possess around 170 nuclear warheads. But right under that, it says Pakistan is not a signatory to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. So I guess they didn't sign on. Is there
anybody that's part of that program, Jim?
Yeah, we are, because we got thousands of them.
I love it when they talk to the Israeli, any commentator, any Israeli person who's in the army, anybody who's ever lived in Israel. And when they say, "Well, your nuclear weapons," what? Wait, we don't have any.
I can neither confirm nor deny that Israel has any nuclear weapons. Of course they do. They have since I think sometime in the 60s.
Hey, Jim, I think we're kind of getting somewhere. There was a site that, of course, came on my phone because my phone knows what I want to look at. And it was basically a, 12 or 15 minute 10 things that you didn't know about Tombstone, the movie Tombstone. 10 things or 12 things that you didn't know about the movie of Tombstone. And
how many of them didn't you know?
well, it was complete fucking hogwash, all of it. Like, like I'd never seen any. Like it was like, what? What are they talking about? They're talking about what a pussy Bill Paxton's character was. They were talking about how powers. It was they just had it all wrong. I mean, they basically had Kurt saying, "Cut," "Maya, let's do another one," like the entire time, but somehow the crew didn't know. So, but I think that we're getting through a little bit. Maybe it's not me and you, but now that I know that you can go to these sites and actually make remarks, after watching about half of this, I thought, and what they were saying about Bill's character, I was like, oh, this is such bullshit. I've got to let me see that. Oh, there's comments here too, just like on the podcast. Oh, you can make comments. So I made some comment like you're fucking out of your fucking mind.
You started at 11 and you didn't take it down to 6, did you?
And then I thought, well, what else is everybody else saying? And I realized, Jim, that 90% of the comments were like, you're full of shit. Yeah, you don't know anything about this. Wyatt Earp wasn't such a fucking great guy. I
think that popped up on my phone.
Oh, it did?
Too, when I was screwing around on YouTube. And I said, I think I read one or two and said, this is horse manure. And went on to what I was originally intending to look up on YouTube. So, it popped up on mine. But
what, Jim? What I wanted to ask you about. A lot of the books that we've read and kind of studied or whatever read and were written after the movie Tombstone came out.
Absolutely. I wound up collecting somewhere close to 15 or 18 books about Tombstone a few years ago, when you and I were doing so much talk and research, etc. about it. And almost all of them are written in the aftermath of the movie, and especially the ones that take a more critical, balanced look at Wyatt Earp, the life of Wyatt. All of them were written after the movie, which makes Kevin's movie and script even that much more remarkable because he didn't have very much research to draw on. There were only a couple of books that were available to him
at that time.
At the time that he he was, how he was striving for, historical authenticity.
Yes.
And his script is by far the most authentic rendering of the Tombstone story that anybody's ever attempted in movies or television, and they've attempted hundreds of them. And his was the most accurate, and he didn't really have that much to go on, but he got from one of the books written in the 1920s, he got the great dialogue, the great idioms that he was using, like "I'm your huckleberry" and "You're a daisy if you do," and "Go ahead, pull that smoke wagon." He got all that kind of
don't forget "All right, longer."
Oh yeah, all right, longer too. Yeah.
Don't forget my line.
Get it on. Yeah.
So fucking tired of people walking.
I'm just fooling about. Yeah.
I'm so fucking tired of people walking up to me saying, "I'll be your huckleberry."
Well, that's why your story about going down to do Mandalorian and looking for your parking place and seeing all these parking places marked Huckleberry is so funny, because I'm sure you had to think it was somebody being funny with you, somebody joking on you, pranking on you.
I wanted to ask you, Jim, because Stephen Lang was so effing good as Ike Clanton, I've always taken a particular interest in Ike Clanton, and even the the author, there's nobody that ever describes Ike Clanton as anything other than exactly what Stephen Lang played in the movies. Would that be correct from all of your research?
Not entirely.
Okay.
And speaking of books about Tombstone, we're talking to the author of a new book about Tombstone about coming on the podcast
I
a
know.
little later in the year.
What's the name of that?
His name is Mark Gardner.
Yeah.
And I've forgotten the title of the book. We can look it up real fast, but it's going to be published by Penguin, major publisher,
Yeah.
later this year. And you and I are supposed to be receiving galleys copies of the book,
right,
to talk about. But his book takes a look at Wyatt and Doc from the time they meet in Dodge City to when they hook up again in Tombstone, and the divergent paths they both took from Dodge to when they see each other again in Tombstone. And from what I understand, it's not the hagiography or lionization of Wyatt that earlier books might have
earlier books, earlier television shows, every movie, every television show, every book up until that point.
I can even remember the lyrics to the Wyatt Earp theme song from Hugh O'Brien's old TV show. Wyatt Earp, I used to watch that as a kid. So.
Well, there's also, and I remember it clearly because I guess it had a catchy tune or whatever. But Lauren, who's the guy from Bonanza? Lauren
Green.
Lauren Green. He lay face down in the desert sand, clutching a 6-gun in his hand. Shot from behind, they thought he was dead. Under his heart lay an ounce of lead. Ringo.
I forgot about that. Now that you mention it, yeah, it was one of those.
It was kind of a hit there for a week or top of the charts type of thing for.
It was. I remember that now. Holy crap.
Yeah. Lauren Green.
By the way, that book is called Brothers of the Gun, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and a Reckoning in Tombstone, and it's going to be out in November.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to basically see the take on Wyatt Earp, because, my take... not while I was doing the movie, because I didn't have very much information on Johnny Ringo. I had a little bit of information, but not much. And you're right about Kevin, and I think Kevin went to Tombstone and talked to some of the historians and wrote that script. But what you have always called, Jim, the lionization of Wyatt Earp is so pathetically inaccurate. I guess because he lived longer, and then his horror wife, one of his horror wives, lived a little bit longer.
It was the one that Dana Delaney plays in the movie.
I know.
And you remember from the screenplay, she's a more significant character.
Of course she was.
Yeah.
Josie, or as Wyatt would always call her horror name, Sadie.
Her stage has quotes around it, of course. Her working name was Sadie, and although her given name was Josie Marcus, and but he called her Sadie for the next 5 decades that they were together, for the rest of the time they were right until he died.
Was he the only one allowed to call her Sadie?
He was the only one who could call her Sadie. He was the only one, because she insisted on being called Josie after that. But he called her Sadie until he died. And she lived. He died in 1929, and she lived another 20 years after. And she was a fierce protector of his image and a fierce promoter of the, Wyatt Earp, brave, fearless lawman who cleaned up the West. image, and she would fight tooth and nail anybody who tried to paint a different picture because there were other voices at the time. She had commissioned a guy named, or there was a guy named Stuart Little who
Yeah.
was writing a biography, and
Yeah.
she jumped all over his case until he, kind of pointed it or steered it toward the depiction of Wyatt that she was looking for and she wanted. And Wyatt was in Hollywood in his later
I know.
years, and he was palling around or trying to kiss up to people like
Tom Mix.
A young John Ford, Tom
John-
Mix,
Right.
and Bat Masterson was kind of a promoter of Wyatt's too. Bat wrote an article. Bat I think is the most fascinating character out of the Old West. He ended his life as a newspaper man in New York. And once he became a newspaper man in New York, he wrote a couple of stories about his pal Wyatt Earp. So he kind of was an early promoter of
his pal Wyatt Earp. How many times was his pal Wyatt Earp married? 4 or 5, Jim? Do you know? Including
Well, I don't even know if you can call them marriages.
Well,
They were
women
like common law marriages, like.
Yeah.
I don't know that he and Sadie ever went through a formal ceremony.
Well, first, I just wanted to get according to my memories of our research, the first woman that he married, according to our research, wasn't a whore.
No. I think she was young. She died, I think, real young.
She did, Jim, and I read recently, and it's probably bullshit, but I read recently that there was some controversy about her death, and that her family was not real happy with Wyatt Earp. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard ever anything about the original wife's death and being either suspicious or not handled correctly, and her family not being happy with Wyatt Earp?
Yeah, I mean, I have a vague memory of it now that you mention it, but what I especially remember was her family was not real happy with him. Yeah.
Well, had he started any of the whorehouses yet, or was?
Oh yeah. Well, he and his brother had been, working on them for sure. Well,
yeah. Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing that is kind of, even if you're, the people that try to give him a break basically say, he married this woman. She died tragically, and that threw him into a place where he ended up stealing horses and starting whorehouses, and right?
Oh, now you're giving away the plot to the Kevin Costner movie.
I am,
because that's how the Costner movie depicts Wyatt. He was leading this great wholesome life until his wife died and in childbirth, and then it just threw him into despair, and he became kind of a lowlife for a while.
For a while.
Well, maybe the next 60 years, we'll say.
Well, he was known, Jim, as the Illinois bummer. Is that correct?
The Peoria bummer.
Peoria, that's right. Peoria is in Illinois.
Right.
Is Peoria the capital of Illinois?
No.
What's the capital? Come on, Jim. Come on.
Springfield.
So he didn't have time to look that up, and he nailed it. Good. I know that forget
well, you
about.
remember in Peoria, they
Why did they call him
basically-
the Peoria bummer when he was living in Peoria?
Well, because they had put a brothel on a barge, and they were
okay.
moving it up and down the river like a kind of like a bum or a hobo, a transient on the move.
So the word bummer means like a bum. Is that where that word would have meant back then when they called him the Peoria bummer?
I think it is the source of it for that.
He's a
for
bum.
that use. Yeah.
He's a bum.
Uh-huh.
And he was the only involvement with whorehouses and him being a pimp in Illinois, the barges that they
Hey,
would.
here you go. From a story about Wyatt Earp. He was a talking about his time in Illinois. He was a ne'er-do-well, actually. They had bad things to say about him in the local newspaper. They called him a bummer, which is essentially another term for a vagrant.
A vagrant.
Earp and his brother Morgan were arrested multiple times in Peoria for keeping and being found in a house of ill fame.
Ooh, yeah, hanging around those whorehouses, huh?
During another arrest, they didn't pay.
I'm not gonna judge him on that, but go ahead.
Eventually, the Earp brothers, after getting arrested all these times in Illinois, eventually the Earp brothers returned to Missouri for their sister's 11th birthday party.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness!
Earp went back to Peoria for a while, where he was arrested on a keel boat believed to be operating as a floating brothel on the Illinois River.
And from that moment until he left Tombstone, he basically was a pimp, right? I mean, from a very, very early age. That was
this article I'm reading from says no one after paying his fines and following that arrest, Earp left Peoria for good. But Loberg, the author of the author of a book about him, said he would continue to get caught up in similar escapades throughout much of his life. No one understands the whole image of Earp is based on the 1950s TV show Life and Times of Wyatt Earp, played by the very handsome Hugh O'Brien. And the song says, "Brave, courageous, and bold, long may his story be told." Not so much. Loberg says. So, and he says, yeah, basically through the rest of his life, he basically was he really only wore a badge for 6 years of the nearly 80 that he was alive, from 1876 in Wichita to 1882 in Tombstone, and that was it, for 6 years, and that's more or less where his legend is developed, and for the rest of the time he was either
how much of that was
running,
how much of that was in Dodge City?
Only about 2 years.
2 years in Dodge City, and then the
Wichita. The three places where he was, most prominently located as wearing any kind of a badge was Wichita first, then Dodge, and then Tombstone. And in each place, he pretty much wore out his welcome after about 2 years.
Yeah.
And he whatever he tried other than being a lawman never worked for him. Whatever other ventures he tried, whether it was racing horses or trying to start up an express company, no legitimate business has ever worked for him. Never made any real money at anything like that.
I always have the kind of the gut feeling that the Earps and Wyatt, they just weren't that smart. They just weren't that smart. I mean,
one of the really good writers of a recent book about the Tombstone, about the Earps, a guy named Tom Clavin, called them ambitious and clannish.
Well, but that could be said about a lot of us, actually. I mean, not. I mean, clannish just basically means you've got your family.
Yeah. He was making that reference really in speaking about them in terms of their relationship with the McClarys and with the Clantons. And you started off by talking about Steve Lang's portrait of Ike, and did that comport with what I've read? And what I've read is that he was a member of that community. People dealt with him regularly, and yeah, he could be a little bit of a hothead, but what seemed to have really ignited him at the time of the events depicted in the movie is that his father had just been killed a few weeks or months earlier.
Right.
And that seemed to, he was pretty much under control until his father was killed. Old Newt old man Clanton,
Right.
the one that Robert Mitchum was supposed to play in the
Right.
movie, and then in the last one that Mitchum just wound up doing that narration, and
Hard to get that fucking bottle out of his hand, wasn't it?
I don't know about that, but you would know. And then they gave his dialogue to Powers, in that
Yeah.
opening scene where Powers says, "I'm what you might call the founder of the feast." That was initially supposed to be Robert Mitchum's dialogue as Old Man Clanton, but Powers wound up with that juicy bit of dialogue.
Don't you
And
think there?
so yeah, losing his father kind of unraveled him a little bit, but like I said, he was a member of the community, a rancher. He was in town quite a bit, and people didn't run in fear of Ike when he came to town.
Right.
You know,
And certainly not the McClary brothers.
no,
They were pretty upstanding citizens. Remember the claim that I really like to have that quote. Not that I need you to get it, Jim, but somebody accused one of the McClary brothers of either stealing a cow or rebranding cows or whatever cattle, and he in the newspaper, and he kind of went in.
Well, this is really funny that the depiction of the Clantons and the McClarys is that they were like desperados,
Yes,
bad
always.
guys. They were ranchers in the local community, and somebody was rebranding stolen army mules on Tom McClary's property or Frank McClary's property, and the Earps showed up as part of a posse, and basically they left, and nothing much happened. But McClary was real upset that the Earps were snooping around on his property. So this desperado of the Wild West, how did he get his retribution? He wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper, and he laid out what his problems were with these citizens, because basically they were
citizens.
they were citizens. They weren't
Right.
really lawmen at that point. They
Right.
just were part of a posse, with these citizens showing up on his property snooping about.
Right.
And he was real upset about it, so he wrote this kind of
This is
angry
the
letter
older
to
brother.
this is the old
Right.
of the Frank and Tom, the two brothers, and those guys were really industrious. They were building a ranch. They
Was this the
had
second
one.
ranch they had, or
Yeah, well, I was going to say they built one ranch kind of a little to the west of Tombstone, and they were building a bigger one, and with more infrastructure a little bit west of Tombstone as well. So, and they were active businessmen. The degree of criminality of those two families, the Clantons and the McClarys, about the only thing the McClarys probably did was let their property be used as a way station for cattle being smuggled out of Mexico,
Right.
rustled and smuggled out of Mexico.
Right.
But stealing cattle from Mexico was not considered a bad thing necessarily in those days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Clantons did the same, but they may also have helped with people who were rustling cattle from American ranchers, which the McClarys didn't do. So that's kind of where the degree of criminality of those two families. You never saw the McClarys or the Clantons on a wanted poster for stage robbery or bank robbery or anything like that. Never anything like that at all. So
Or
that was
or the Clantons, or
the Clantons. No,
Right.
No, any breaking the law had to do generally with rustling.
Well,
Yeah.
Jim, we used to when we used to talk about this, we used to talk about how much material, how much material is really still left to be told, and now that we know more, Kevin's movie was a good movie, and it was more historically correct than any other movie that was done. I talk about of Wyatt as being sort of, he seems pretty heroic to me in that movie. I don't really see shadings of I guess he slapped around Billy Bob Thornton, but Billy Bob Thornton was an asshole. Do you really see anything in that movie where you look at and you go, this is a Wyatt Earp that we're really not familiar with?
No, but there's a huge kind of subplot to Wyatt's time in Tombstone that the movie never really could get to. And that's how much he wanted that sheriff's job.
Yes.
He wanted the job of sheriff. Now, in the movie, he arrives in town and he's initially approached, like, 'cause I just watched the opening of it again a few days ago, because as you know, it's on all the time. And um and the mayor approaches him, and Wyatt says, "Oh, no, I'm done with law. I'm here to just build I would need to spend more time with my family. That's what I
with my wife Sadie,
with my devoted, loving wife Sadie, and we're going to build a family, a cozy little family here until I meet that actress Josie that has just come into town." But he says, "No, I'm done with being a lawman." That's not remotely true. Now, it is true when Wyatt left Dodge. He said, "I'm done with being a lawman. There's no money in it." Right. But when he got to Arizona and found out that they were about to create a new county called Cochise County down where Tombstone is located, and that a new county would need a sheriff, and that the sheriff was also the tax collector and got to keep 10% of whatever he collected.
Yeah.
And Tombstone had these really rich silver mines and railroads in the county. Then, being able to collect taxes from railroads and silver mines was really lucrative. In fact, the sheriff of Cochise County could make upwards of what would be today about $1 million a year.
And that was Johnny Biehn, is that correct? That
was Johnny Biehn. Yeah. Now they hadn't really settled on a sheriff yet when Wyatt heard about this. And that's when he got real interested. And he thought that he had worked out a deal with Johnny Biehn where Biehn would become the sheriff and Wyatt would become the under sheriff. And Biehn would just do like the tax, the easy stuff, the tax collecting, that kind of stuff. And Wyatt would be the muscle. He'd be the strong. He'd be the Russell
He'd
Crowe.
Be the one who would hit the drunk guy in the back of the head.
He'd be like the Russell Crowe character in L.A. Confidential. Yeah. The guy, the Ed White, the guy who's just Bud White, the guy who's just there for the muscle. That's his talent. He's the muscle.
Right.
And Wyatt thought he had that arrangement. Well, Biehn kind of double crossed him, because Biehn said, "I don't want this fucking Wyatt Earp on my case. He's got these brothers who are always around. He's only looking out for himself." So when Biehn became sheriff, he ignored Wyatt completely and named somebody else as an under sheriff. So then Biehn brings this fiance to town, Josie Marcus, and Wyatt says, "Holy cow, I kind of like her, and she's giving me the look." So he not only wanted Biehn's job, he wanted Biehn's woman too. And that led the effort to get Biehn's job led Wyatt to think that he needed maybe some grandiose gesture to get the city fathers to back him to become sheriff the next time the election rolled around. So he started to engage in some schemes to do that. He was plotting to get credit, to get attention. And one of his schemes involved trying to find the guys who had robbed a stagecoach. And to do that, he tried to use Ike Clanton as a confidential informant. And as you can imagine, that went all haywire. that went to hell. I mean, where's the problem there? Well, Ike wasn't the most reliable figure for that kind of a job, being a confidential informant. Didn't last too long. Plus, the guys they were looking for got themselves killed before they could locate them, before Ike could turn them in even. So, but that just led to a whole fiasco, and then it may have led to the argument that Ike and Doc were having the night before the gunfight. But So that was part of the background. And
go ahead.
And then in a couple of months before the gunfight, Wyatt was working very much with a couple of guys in town who were trying to form a vigilante committee.
Yes.
And they called it the Tombstone Vigilance Committee. They had some sort of name for it. And in fact, at one point in September, which was only a month before the gunfight, Frank walked up to one of the Earps and said, "I hear you boys are putting up a vigilance committee to hang us." So the McClarys were already very wary of Earp.
Yeah.
And what he thought would be maybe some vigilante action, some outside the law, action. So they were very wary of the Earps. They thought the Earps were trying to intrude on their territory. So that's some of the backdrop to when the gunfight actually occurred. You notice in the gunfight, the people who got killed, the gunfight didn't involve Wyatt and Doc and the Earp brothers squaring off against Curly Bill Brocious and Johnny Ringo,
No.
the bad guys in the crew. No, they went after the ranchers, the local ranchers.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you know, as we've talked about, the McClarys were on their way out of town to go to their sister's wedding in Iowa. And they had just collected their proceeds from cattle sales, legitimate cattle sales. They had close to $3,000 on them when they walked through that vacant lot, on their way out of town.
That day, I guess Clanton, had been drinking through the night, and I'll kill the Earps. Fuck the Earps.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna I'll kill them if I see them. Give me a gun. Whatever.
If they want to fight, they'll get a fight.
So
they got to fight. Yeah.
So they throw him in jail, and he gets bailed out fucking an hour later or whatever. But
they give him a $25 fine and send him back out again.
What nobody ever really kind of mentions that I always find interesting is, I think it's the younger McClary brother goes into town to either, get Ike out or to find out.
No, he's going into town to collect the money. To go to the butchers that they'd been selling beef to collect their money. Yeah, so he was in town to collect money.
And he goes into town, and for no reason that I've ever heard or read.
None that anybody's ever come up with.
Wyatt Earp just smashes him over the head with his gun.
Well, Wyatt had that. They called it buffaloing.
I know
that technique of, and they.
I know, but you usually do that to some drunk guy in a bar who's grabbing women.
That's when he would use it. He developed it supposedly to handle drunks. To calm them down or to get them subdued by banging them in the forehead with his pistol, and he just walked up to Tom McClary and banged him over the top of the head for no reason.
Right. So,
other than the fact that he was a McClary.
Right. That day, I guess, and they say that Wyatt was in a bad mood. Well, so you're in a bad. One of the guys he killed, one of the guys they killed in the gunfight, they had just Wyatt had just beaten
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, unprovoked. Just walked up to him and banged him on the top of the head.
Yeah, that never quite gets as much attention as it seems to me that
No.
And is that the brother that did not have the pistol when he was? Because if I'm correct, Jim, and recently I heard it a little bit differently, but I've always thought, ever since we've been talking about this, that there were 3 Earp brothers. They all had pistols, and there was Doc Holliday who had his pistol and the Wells Fargo shotgun.
They had stopped by the Wells Fargo office and picked up the shotgun from Wells Fargo.
Supposedly gave it to Doc Holliday
and they told him to hide it in his jacket.
Right, and they go down and. Am I wrong that only one McClary brother, and not obviously Ike didn't have one that's depicted in the movie, but only one McClary brother and one Clanton brother had a Colt had a piece on them? Isn't it?
I think that's true because I know that
So when the
Frank.
gunfight starts, I mean, when the gunfight starts, only two of the of the three that
Four.
were.
There are four people because Ike is there.
I mean,
Remember?
Ike's there, but
yeah, but
yeah,
he's
but Ike's
unarmed.
not. Ike doesn't want to fight, and he doesn't want
No,
any
he
part
comes
of it.
running
And
up to
he's
Wyatt and says, I'm unarmed, I'm unarmed,
yeah.
and he runs into the photography shop next door. And
But they were all
his younger
but so was one of the McClary brothers was unarmed also, and it seems to me it was like four.
the one Frank, the one that Doc kills, the one that Doc's where Frank, he's wounded and he says, I got you now, and Holiday says, you're a daisy if you do, and then he shoots him. That guy wasn't armed. What he was reaching for was his rifle in a scabbard attached to his saddle on his horse. His rifle was put away, and that's what he was trying to get when he was shot. So yeah, it was pretty much an ambush. Although they did apparently say surrender your weapons, which was kind of ridiculous because they were on their way out of town.
Yes.
And you were supposed to turn in your weapons to you could turn them into a saloon, you could turn them into the sheriff's office, but you really weren't supposed to be carrying weapons around town. Open carry wasn't really allowed in Tombstone. But
it is now.
Yeah, you can now. Yeah,
it is in Arizona now.
Yeah, you definitely can now. But that didn't count when you were on your way out of town after you'd already picked up your weapon and you were out of town, going out of town. That's essentially what they were, because they'd already left the OK Corral.
Corral.
They'd already left, and they were kind of in an alleyway. Yeah, they were right next to it, but they were essentially on their way out of town. Now they had purchased ammunition a little earlier in that morning, which apparently the Earps found out about. Oh, the McClarys are buying ammunition. That must mean they're coming gunning for us. Well, could also mean that they just needed some because they're about to undertake a long trip.
Shoot rabbits on their way to Missouri.
Yeah, well, they're going from Tombstone, Arizona to Iowa. There's still some nasty Indians around. There's still some bad men out there. Bad guys, especially if you're carrying a lot of cash to your sister's wedding. You might want some protection.
Right.
So they were resupplying themselves with ammunition, but. And then the confrontation occurred later that afternoon, as like we said, as they were on their way out of town.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then as you know, the town was almost immediately divided on
well, first of all, Jim, you're dealing with Democrats and Republicans here.
Yeah,
correct.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely.
So that's. Look at the divisions that we have now. It's basically the same thing that was going on in Tombstone, where you had a group of people that wanted, Tombstone to, be more business oriented, and schools and like and you had a group of people that said, "Hey, we came to Arizona because we don't want the government telling us what to do and how to do."
Well, and
how different is that than what we have?
Generally, the ranchers were people from Texas and from the South, and they were the Democrats, and they'd been on the Confederate side of the war, and the business people were more from the northern states, and they'd been on the Union side. Like the Earps were from Illinois to start with, and a couple of them had served in the Union Army. Wyatt was too young for the Civil War, but a couple of them had served.
He's wrangling hookers too, so that was
he was a teenager.
He had his hands full.
He was learning his risky business. He was running a brothel when he was a teenager.
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
But the business interests were more Republican, aligned with former Union forces, etc. So there was definitely a political
element involved.
But bitter politics involved for sure. Biehn was a Democrat, Wyatt was a Republican.
Yeah,
and that had some, just some extra layer of hostility to things.
How, and
So
yeah, Jim, how long after the sh- the yeah, you call it a gunfight, or I just referred to it as the murders.
yeah.
How far after? How long after the murders was it before the city decided to have this inquiry, this sort of like inquiry into what had happened and whether or not the Earp should be charged or not. Do you know?
Very, very, very soon.
Okay.
There actually was a coroner's inquest within a day or so of the gunfight, and within a couple of days, in those days, private citizens could file charges, criminal charges, and there would be an inquiry into whether there was,
Enough
sufficient
evidence.
probable, yeah, if there was probable cause to hold them for trial.
Right.
So Ike went ahead and filed charges against Wyatt and Doc, and an inquiry proceeded. And this thing lasted, as you know, we'd mentioned before, it lasted for close to a month, and it had testimony, witnesses. Biehn testified, Ike testified. There are kind of sort of transcripts of their testimony. They aren't the most accurate. They're not like a court reporter was there. They're kind of drawn up from reporters' notes, etc. But there are supposed transcripts of their testimony, and there's no question that Wyatt's testimony. Wyatt immediately got lawyers from Wells Fargo. They put up the money for him to get lawyers, and they crafted a pretty, a pretty exculpatory statement from him, one that doesn't accept any blame whatsoever,
Right.
and puts all the blame on the other guys. And as you know, when Wyatt got up and was able to give this statement, and under kind of a weird quirk of Arizona law at the time, because this was a preliminary inquiry, he alone didn't have to be subject to any cross-examination. He could just get up there and say whatever he had worked up with his lawyers in terms of a statement. Whereas the other folks who testified, like Biehn and Clanton, et cetera, were subject to cross-examination. So, but it went on for a month, and as you know, for at least a couple of weeks of that time, Wyatt and Doc were thrown in jail.
And the only reason the other two brothers weren't thrown in jail is because they'd both been shot, right?
They were both recovering from their wounds. Yeah,
Yeah.
they'd been wounded in the gunfight for sure. Otherwise, they would have been in jail.
Yeah.
That's true. So
one of the other elements of Tombstone that I always find so kind of disturbingly, and in the movie, maybe one of our listeners might know, but Wyatt, after the Sam Elliott character is shot, and then after Wyatt's brother's killed, he goes on
Virgil and Morgan.
Thank you. He goes on the what ride?
Vendetta. It was called the Vendetta ride.
And the Vendetta ride is they show it in Tombstone, and probably in Tombstone, it's you get the voiceover too, and you get the idea. At that point, they just went around and lawed up and cleaned up the entire area, killed, you get the feeling from the movie that they shot like 30 people, They just said like, everybody that's even close to being a bad guy is going to get killed. And I don't know, maybe we've talked about all this sort of stuff.
The first time I saw the movie, I don't even think I'd talked to you about it yet. But the first time I did know that that they had to tear out a bunch of pages of the screenplay.
Yes.
When they were making the movie. So
Yes.
when I'm watching the movie and when it comes to the Vendetta ride, and you get Robert Mitchum back in with the narration,
right?
And it
right.
looked to me like basically you'd have one shot of a bunch of guys on horses riding, from stage left to stage right, and then you'd cut in a picture of cowboys riding from stage right to stage back and forth, just random cuts with random shots of cowboys riding around, blowing things up and shooting each other. And Robert Mitchum saying, and then they went on this ride, and I'm thinking, yeah, that's where they tore the pages out. That's where the compressed storytelling comes in. But it does look like, he's shooting up the whole countryside. I mean, like doesn't he ride into a barber shop, like through the front window or something, and shoot the guy in the. I mean, really, you're gonna, risk.
Well, it is a movie. I mean,
horse?
listen, it is a movie. It is a movie.
Okay,
so
okay.
I kind of get that, but so much of
I think does he shoot Ike in the movie? I think he runs
no,
down Ike.
I think he points the gun at Ike and
yeah.
Does he shoot? No, he doesn't shoot Ike. He doesn't. I don't think he shoots Ike. He points the gun at him and says, whatever.
I think Ike runs away again or something to that effect.
Sniveling and pleading for his life with a gun at his forehead. And as we all know, Ike ended up dying in what's that part of Arizona?
Well, you would know, having gone off and looked for his bones a couple of times.
I did go off and look for his bones a couple of times.
He wound up dying pretty close to the border of New Mexico.
Yeah,
Arizona.
Yeah.
New Mexico.
I'm trying to think of the name of. There's a mining community up there, and there's a mining town. I'll think of that name. It's not really important, but I went up there. I remember the first. Yeah, the first time I went up there,
that's what I was chuckling
about. I went up there with Jeff, a couple of city boys.
Oh, we're gonna go find Ike Clanton's bones.
Well, we thought we
got this map. We found this map in a magazine.
No, well, here's what happens: is there's a guy by the name of Terry Ike Clanton who's still around. And I've got nothing against Terry Ike Clanton. I've met him before. Nice guy. Claims to be, part of the Clanton family. And he very well may be. But he and a person who was well known for finding people's graves, Jim. And the guy actually they wrote a book. Not they. This guy wrote a book about where all these famous graves were.
I think they've got a website too.
Well,
you can go
and
to.
So
yeah.
I went to. This is 4 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago. Once when I bought the house in Bisbee, I thought, gee, I'm not really that far away from where Terry Ike Clanton claimed that Ike Clanton was buried, and what Terry Ike said about Ike Clanton was that he had found the grave along with this other guy that was a grave finder. I'll just call him a grave finder. I don't know what else you'd do. He was famous for finding people's graves, and that they went back to the city, or they went back to the state, and asked permission to, probably the same thing that I would have wanted to do, which I had permission to do, is if I had found his grave and I could verify that his bones were Ike Clanton's bones, the mayor of Tombstone was going to allow me to take those bones and put them in Boot Hill, which nobody's been buried in for about the last 30 years, 40, 50, 60 years, whatever it is. And so it all started with this idea that Terry Ike Clanton said, "This is where he is. We know exactly where he is, and this is the exact spot that he was." So I originally went up there, Morenci. I think that's the name of the area, Morenci.
Okay.
And I originally went up there with another guy, another city boy, and we went up there, and we really we didn't really know what we were doing, and we got out of the truck, and I don't know. He had something on his phone that would kind of show the direction of where, we were supposed to be looking. And we walked for about a half an hour or 45 minutes, and we found what was at that point. This is kind of crazy, man. I can't believe I was.
I just found that website we went to that had like the satellite images and the pictures of what the rocks stacked together should look like, and all that geo map locations, etc.
Well, I looked at that and I thought, like, well, this is real. Like everything else in my life, I'm just I'm an idiot. I'm just like, well, if it says so on my phone, it must
be real.
It's got to be real, right? So I went up there with this friend Jeff, and he was a city boy, and he was. I think he lived in Phoenix, and he met me. We went up through Morenci. We parked the car, and he
was helping us with like website stuff.
Yeah, he was
website
very
design.
Good.
Yeah,
very, very good with computers. Very, very good with computers. But we went up there and proceeded to get totally fucking lost, and you had
no cell phone coverage up
there.
No,
you don't have any. The cell phone worked as far as him looking at the cell phone and being able to go like, this is north and this is south, sort of. But it didn't, like, you couldn't call anybody, or it was like, we were way off the beaten track, and. Now, what you originally look for, according to Terry Ike Clanton in this group, and the guy that wrote this book,
Browning. His name is Browning. He's a famous grave researcher. Okay, James Browning.
Okay, well, is you look for Peg Leg Wilson's the room.
I was just gonna say it's right near Peg Leg Wilson's cabin. What a great name.
This is supposedly where Ike Clanton was killed, according to the best history that you're aware of. Is that correct, Jim? I mean,
yeah.
And so, therefore, his grave would have, they would have buried him where he.
Supposedly he was buried on the site where he was shot.
Yeah, and
under a tree.
Yeah, okay. Well, turns out there's a lot of trees out there.
Which one? Yeah. Look for the one that might have been alive 140 years ago. Yeah, that
one. I think that oak tree is still there, the one that Johnny Ringo was found underneath. I've been to his gravesite a couple of times. But anyway, so we're looking for Ike's gravesite. And Jeff's heavy, overweight, and once you get up into that, like, where there aren't any roads anymore, and it gets pretty hairy, going up and down like hilly, foresty sort of like. I don't know what you call it, branches and
scrub brush.
Thank you,
and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you start, and so anyway, we spent an hour looking for an hour or two. I was pretty sure we were going to find it because they have in that guy's book. They have pictures. They have pictures of his gravesite, and they have other pictures
like rocks,
yes, and other rocks that are close at nearby.
There are visual, clues supposedly.
Well, then there are other grave markings in that area, as if
like
okay,
the fireplace from the cabin,
Peg Leg
his
Wilson's
cabin.
his wives or his dead children, whoever, they were kind of buried in the same area, and there was writing. This is according to what I'm reading online. So this is what me and Jeff are looking for, and so Jeff and I go up there, and we go looking for what we see on that site, and there's pictures of Ike
and locations. They gave us the satellite imagery. My gosh.
Well, yeah. What do they call that in the military when it's like a longitude and latitude, right? I mean,
your location.
Yeah.
So your GPS. Yeah, there's GPS here on this thing.
Yeah. Listen, Jim, I think that.
From what I remember of the story, you guys were lost until suddenly you saw a telephone pole somewhere and realized, you're
jumping way ahead. I'll continue with this.
I thought you were getting off the story.
No, well, no. I was getting off the story because I wanted to end this particular podcast. And I wanted to pick this up again and talk about this again. And so let's do that, okay? Because there's a lot of Tombstone stuff that I want to talk to you about, because we had this idea of creating something for the movies or for streaming, or 8 episodes or 10 episodes or 12 episodes around Tombstone, because there's so much that went on even before the Earps even showed up.
Absolutely. And our first thought was that trial, that so-called trial, was such an interesting situation. That was, and so kind of ignored by history. There's no mention of it in the movie. I don't think there was even any mention of it in Kevin's original screenplay.
No, I don't think so.
No, not at all. And it, there's an entire book written about it. You remember, by a professor at your father's old alma mater, Northwestern Law School, called Murder in Tombstone, which was a very thorough. And this guy is a trial advocacy professor. He teaches trial advocacy, and his book is a very detailed look at the whole month-long inquest, without getting really boring or too legally technical or anything. It's a very fun read called Murder in Tombstone.
Depends on what your definition of is. All right.
I'm saying, hey, it's coming from a law school professor, and believe me, it's readable. Okay, it doesn't read like a law text.
So yes,
hold on.
Well, we're just doing a new thing now, which I wanted to tell the audience about, which is that instead of just recording one episode from now on, we're just going to record 2 back to back. Boom, boom, split them up into 2. So you get an extra episode every week. So we're going to try and go to 2 episodes every week going forward, and I got some more stuff too. Bringing guests, like, this week it'll be Kathy was aired today, and then you're seeing this on Thursday. So, and if we don't have a guest, then it'll just be 2 of these episodes. If we do have a guest, it'll be 1 and 1. I don't know. We're just giving you more content, and I got even more stuff coming for you in the future. But I got to see how this one works out. These like 3-hour recording windows, 2 episodes. We'll see how that works out, and if it's good, and you guys are liking it, and we're getting, more listeners, more subscribers, then we can just give more content. So we're trying this new thing out, and hopefully it'll work.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So can I take a break?
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta go pee, Jim.
We'll see you next week.
Get back and start over again. Okay.
Yeah, our bladders aren't what they used to be.
No.
Yeah, we better go relieve them and pick this up again.